Good afternoon, I'm Nolan. I'm going to do a talk on Mura ORM and the new Mura 7 Feed API, how they work together in Mura 7 applications. Here's my obligatory ego slide, a little bit about me. I'm an independent consultant. I run South Shasta. That's my consulting business. I do Cold Fusion and Java and teach classes on different programming aspects. And lately the Blue River folks have been keeping me pretty busy. And now the laptop is freaking out. It's just fine for the last 20 minutes. It's been sitting here. I don't know what changed. I literally didn't do anything except move the mouse to the side. So I'll have to come back. We'll have to figure that out. Don't know what's going on there. All right. Well, hopefully, you guys be working on that. There we go. Thank you. So I'm an independent consultant. I build stuff using lots of different languages and teach programming classes on different aspects of web and mobile development. The Blue River folks have been keeping me pretty busy lately, writing different themes and plugins for some of their projects. For the local folks, I run a user group called SAC Interactive. It's a once-a-month meetup over at Hacker Lab, 17th and I, where we talk about all things web and mobile development related. The topic changes from month to month. And coincidentally, this coming Wednesday is our next meeting. I'm the presenter, and we're going to give an intro to Mura 7, so if you have other people at work that want to check it out for the first time, that'd be a good free way for them to come downtown and kind of see a real quick show and tell of what you can do in Mura 7 and how you build websites. I'd be willing to bet that I spend more time and money buying vinyl records and going to concerts than anyone else here at the conference. This is my chunk of CDs that I have at home in my record collection. I'm quite proud of my record collection. So today's agenda will look about like this. We're going to go over like what is ORM for just a couple minutes, and then show you like why you might want to use ORM in your Mura applications. We'll look at a handful of different real-world code samples of how you can do different things with ORM in and out of Mura. We'll switch gears and look at the Feed API. This is sort of an add-on pack for the ORM stuff. I'll show you several samples of that, and then we'll answer your questions towards the end of the talk. So if you're not a big note taker, or if you don't want to scribble down all of my code samples as we go, everything is on GitHub. Just search for Nolan Erck and go to the repo that I have called Mura 7 presentation. You can get all of the slides and all of the code samples that we're going to go over for my talk today. And tomorrow I'm giving a talk on infinite scrolling, and all the stuff is all in that same repo. You can just grab it all at once and download it in 1 minute. So real quick show of hands, who loves writing SQL statements? Not one guy, two people. Okay, 2 people out of 100 or so, 50? Not a lot, right? It's pretty time consuming. If you have 50 tables in your app, you need to be able to insert, update, delete, and read records out of each table. You need to write CRUD statements for all 50 of those. It can get very repetitive dealing with that. I can never remember, I certainly forget to put a comma somewhere in at least half of those statements the first time that I write them. I always forget where the single quotes go, or I forget that I have to escape the single quote in the middle of a value if it's got one there. Dealing with formatting dates is the same kind of issue. Do dates go in the curly brackets or did they not? Which databases will let me not put them in the curly brackets and which ones need them formatted different ways? Each vendor is a little bit different. If I have an app that I'm planning on selling, and some of my customers use Microsoft SQL, some use MySQL, and some use whatever else, I have to deal with those little bitty variations between SQL on each platform, and basically rewrite big chunks of the SQL 3 times to get that to work. And there are techniques that will help with that. Like you can use things like the factory pattern, which helps kind of compartmentalize all of your code into like here's the MySQL factory and here's the Oracle factory and so on, so it's at least organized, but that's still a lot of really repetitive, really tedious code to write to deal with that kind of thing. And again, yeah, if you want to support multiple databases, you just have a great big mix of stuff you have to deal with there. In the example of like a real-world intranet Mura sites, you might have 2 databases, one for all your Mura content, and then maybe one for related stuff that maybe, I don't know, some sort of import database that other vendors stick PDF files into, and XML feeds get imported into that as well. Maybe they're 2 different databases. Maybe one of them is MySQL and one is Oracle because of departments merging each other and so on. It can get really big and annoying to deal with different types of databases when you don't really care about things at the database level. You just care about what shows up in your website. You want to find ways to make that stop, and that's where ORM kind of comes into play and makes your life a little bit easier. So ORM stands for Object Relational Mapping. It's a fancy phrase for meaning you write objects instead of writing your SQL statements. So rather than doing select star from table name or select 50 different columns from table name and so on, you write objects. So in the case of Soul Fusion, you write CF components. And then those components have code behind the scenes that generates the SQL for you. So rather than switching between CFML and SQL and back and forth, you get to stick solely in the CFML land and just write Cold Fusion syntax. And then that will take care of the SQL for you behind the scenes. ORM is not specific to Mura or even Cold Fusion. Mura's got Mura ORM. Cold Fusion itself has the CF ORM wrapper, which kind of lives on top of Hibernate. And it's a Java. In the Java land, you can use Hibernate stuff directly. .NET's got its own version of ORM. Ruby and C++ and all the other languages have the same thing. So they all kind of solve the same problem. It just depends on which type of syntax it is you're looking for. So, and with that, we'll take a look at a few code samples here. So I'm going to flip between Sublime. Is that large enough that the folks in the back can read the code samples okay? Iffy? All right, we bump that up a little bit. Better? Better? Okay, good. So this screen will be fine, and the browser is going to be fine. So I'm over here. I can bump that up a little bit. We're not actually going to look at too much here in the browser, so you don't have to worry too much if these links aren't super visible. The one I'm worried about, though, is Enterprise Manager doesn't like to blow up any larger. So if you can't see select statements very well, we're going to do a couple of these. You may want to just kind of zip forward and grab some of the open seats up front if you want. And we're going to look at a couple of new tables over here that I'm going to create too. So we'll start over here in Sublime land with a real quick sample. I'm going to open up my musician CFC. So this is just a regular CF component in Cold Fusion. It could be baked into a Mura display object that you've built, a Mura plugin, part of one of your themes. The actual location doesn't matter, they'll work the same no matter how you're loading this thing up into memory. I've got a musician CFC, and I've got 4 different properties here on that musician. He's got an ID, just the unique primary key number. And then I've got 3 properties for him, name, age, and the instrument that he or she plays. You'll notice there's no SQL in here. There's no functions that create insert statements or updates or anything else. All I've got is a little bit of basically metadata at the top here. I'm extending a piece inside Mura being ORM. I'm adding the entity name here that just gives it the name of the thing I'm dealing with. And then I've got a piece here that says table equals, and that points to what will eventually become a SQL table in my database. I've got it called NRE musician. Just out of personal preference, whenever I make tables that get stuck into the same database as my Mura stuff, I always prefix those tables with something other than the letter T, because all the Mura tables are like T content or T content categories. In this case, I'm just using my initials. So there's nothing in here, no SQL. And over here in Enterprise Manager, I've got my MuraCon 2017 database. Here's all my tables, and I'll refresh this so you can see it as the latest and greatest version. You notice these are sorted alphabetically, and there's nothing that begins with NRE underscore, so there's no NRE musician table that's been created over there. By making this property, so I made my component, and I'm going to go into a little code sample here. These top 2 lines are basically how you would take a component, like my, like my musician CFC, and here's how you would actually load it up into the Mura architecture and make it usable for you. These top 2 lines are things that you basically put in one of your on-application load event handlers somewhere when the site first loads up or when your server first loads up. You put these in like application CSE or someplace like that. In the interest of making it easy just to show you all the code in one spot, I've kind of stuck everything in one file. So these 2 lines would go in there somewhere. You just get an instance of Mura. And that's really just because I'm in a regular .cfm file, I'm not in a Mura component. You can skip that line if you're in Mura. Use your service factory to say, I'm going to make a thing called musician. Here's the path that points to where that CFC lives. I've got a folder called ORM demos, model, and there's my musician CFC. And I've just got to set through this singleton as false, meaning each time I call this, make me a new one. Don't make one and save it for the entire website. Then I'm running that, I'm taking get bean out of the Mura scope and saying, go make me a thing called musician. It's going to grab that musician CFC that we created a moment ago, and I'm going to run check schema on. What that will do is it'll load up my musician CFC, it'll look at all these columns here, and it will look in the database for a table called NRE musician. If it doesn't find that table, it's going to automatically create it in the database for me. Then it's going to go in and make all 4 of these columns, setting them to whatever data types I have noted over here. Field type set to ID, that means I want this to be my primary key. And then I've got types for numeric and string here that will just set the data to whatever the appropriate SQL type is. You can see if I go back here to my ORM1 file, that'll create the table. And I'm going to go in here and actually turn off this bottom set of code just to start. All right, save that. So now we're only going to run these 3 lines here. 2 things that are boilerplate that would go in your application load, and then I'm going to run the check schema that really would go in your application load as well. Go to ORM1, run the page, we get a big white screen, nothing terribly exciting. Let's go back over here to the database though, and refresh this. And now at the top of my database, I've got a table called NRE musician. And there's the 4 columns that were in that component. You can see musician ID got marked as the primary key. It got configured with not null options, so it's a legit table with, you can use it, like you would use any table that I manually created in the database. Now I'm going to go back here into that same file and uncomment this code. And now what we've done is we've added these 3 lines down here, 4 lines, excuse me. I'm going to say, go make me a bean called musician. Save it to my variable, and then just set the name and age properties to David Bowie and 70. I'm a big music nerd. You're going to see lots of music references in my sample talk today and tomorrow. And rather than writing an insert or an update statement, I just call .save. Go back here, load that up, get the same like white screen, but now when we go back to SQL, and I say, give me everything from the musician table, there's my record in the database. You can see it set saving the primary key. It set the 2 properties that I assigned it to those values, and it left instrument null because I didn't actually have a set instrument call in my code sample. So I was able to create a database table, set all the columns to like where the primary key goes, and set the different properties on it, and I was able to add a new record to the table with writing 0 SQL anywhere in my app. Real similar to if you've written display objects or other plugins and such that do the same kind of thing with like content beans or category beans, where you can manipulate Mura stuff from just writing code. Here we're doing the same kind of thing, except musician is obviously not a table baked into the Mura ecosphere. It's a table I made from scratch as maybe an add-on plugin or a display object or whatever else you have in your app. All right. Let's look at a second code sample. So now I've added that record into my database. I want to actually pull it out and take a look at it. Get rid of my extra semicolon. Same kind of thing. This is just because I'm in a .cfm file. For ease of giving demos. Get an instance of Mura, say Mura.getBean, Mura scope, getBean musician. And in this case, I'm just loading it by the name of whatever the record is in my database. You can see it's David Bowie right there. I get back an object, and then this one will give us a slightly more interesting looking output. You can see that I actually am dumping that ORM bean out to the screen. There's my name and age properties that are set, and there's everything else that comes back with anything that you pulled back from Mura as a bean ORM object. It comes back with a few other properties in there along with it, as well as various methods baked inside there for doing lots of fun stuff, some of which we'll look at later on today, and some of which I'm just going to kind of point you to where you can get more reference material later. So again, I was able to create a record in the last, create a table and insert a record in the last demo, writing no SQL, and now I can do a select statement, get the record back and manipulate it as a content bean, writing no SQL as well. Now I've got a sample where I'm just going to add 3 more records to my musician object, Les Claypool, Larry Lalonde, and Tim Alexander. Does anyone recognize those names? Do you know who that is? Primus? You and I can be friends. We'll hang out later. All right, so let's load that one up. Sometimes I give a demo using a video from the band Buckethead, and I'll be like, does anyone know Buckethead? And there's either 0 or 1 hands that go up, and glad to see Primus is of the same, same fan base level. All right, so there's my blank screen. That went in and just made 3 musician objects. I set the name, instrument, and age for each one to whatever the properties are, and then just called .save on each of those 3. And you can see there's nothing below that on the screen there. So now when I go back here and run my SQL again, I've got David Bowie, and I've got all 3 guys from Primus in there. Again, writing no SQL. You can add multiple records and do whatever you want that way. All right, so that's 3. Updating a record works the exact same way. Get your instance of Mura, get a musician bean, find the record that you want, I'm going to grab the David Bowie record and set his name to David Jones. Fun fact, David Bowie's real name is David Jones. He changed it to not be confused with Davy Jones from the Monkees when he was first starting out. You'll get free music trivia knowledge here at MuraCon too at no extra charge. Blank white screen, and that's what I expected. But now when I go back here to the database, you can see David Bowie is now David Jones. So again, now I've created a table, done an insert, select, and an update with writing NoSQL. Deleting things works the exact same way. Grab a record, grab a bean, get the bean, load the bean by whatever property you want to load the bean by. In this case, I'm grabbing Tim Alexander, the drummer for Primus, and just going to call m1.delete on it. This is number 5. Go over here and run that one. And now, when we go back here to the database, you can see I no longer have Tim Alexander in my database. So we've done all 4 of the CRUD-type operations, create, read, update, and delete, and we created the database table, insert, update, whatever they are. We've done all 4 CRUD operations and created a database table for a bean in our app, having written 0 SQL anywhere in the process of having to do that. And this was not for a table that was baked into the Mura system, T-content or T-content categories and that sort of thing. It was for a brand new table we made from scratch for our own plugin or our own custom app that we're working on. You can do very similar things with the content that's baked into your Mura site. If you want to grab the category or the content means back and extended attributes and so on, I'll show you some demos of how to do that as well. So that's kind of the basis of the start of ORM, is deleting stuff like that. Let's go take it one step further. Here I've got 2 new beans that we're making. One's called sports team and one's called athlete. So if you're an athlete, you probably belong to a team of some sort. So we have an athlete CFC that's got same kind of thing as before. I've got a primary key. And then he's got a name and a salary. I'll come back to sports team in just one second. You can see I've also got a sports team CFC. It's got a primary key, and then we have the team name and the league that that team belongs to, Major League Baseball or whatever you're dealing with. So back here in athlete, the athlete needs to know which team he belongs to. So we need to have a foreign key that goes from our athlete table into our sports team table, so we can have like a parent-child relationship between the two. These CFCs start out the same way as the musician one did before. We extend Mura bean ORM, and that's really the magic that turns on the Mura ORM stuff for your component. I give it an entity name that just matches how I'm going to refer to it in code. I honestly cannot remember specifically which piece this wires up under the hood, but out of habit I always have it in my CFCs. And then you just give it the name of the database table you want to create when you run this code. So I've got one for sports team. You can see athlete looks the exact same way. Extend bean ORM, give it an entity name, give it a table called athlete, and I've got my properties here. So the new property that we haven't talked about yet is the sports team property in the athlete table. That'll be a foreign key back to whatever team he belongs to. So you can see the syntax here is a little bit different than the sort of plain Jane columns that we had earlier in our app. I've got a column called sports team, which is the actual name of the other component that I'm dealing with. I noted it is not required, meaning you can set it to null. So if I have an athlete that maybe isn't on a team, like a professional skateboarders or sometimes independent guys not on a team, field type of many to one, there are many athletes on one individual team. So you note the relationship here that way. And then, sorry, that keeps popping up. And then the CFC attribute points to, well, what is the other table that I'm dealing with? So I can link the child back to the parent. And what column in that other table do I use to associate these two things together? In this case, I'm using the sports team ID as that particular column. So really the 2 CFCs here are identical to the musician one, except for this property down here, the foreign key that links the 2 together in a relationship. If I go back here to our next code sample, we're just going to load both of those beans up. Again, that code would be in some sort of application load event in your event handler or wherever you're putting that stuff in your particular Mura site. I just put it here for simplicity. I called check schema on both of those things to see, and those are the lines that if those tables have not been created yet, it will go off and create those tables. Down here, I've got 3 teams I'm making: Bad News Bears, Mighty Ducks, and Plan B. Setting the various properties and just calling .save after each one. And then down here, I'm making an athlete, real similar to the way we made the musician in a couple demos earlier. One difference is this line right here. So everything else is pretty much the same except here, instead of setting an actual property in the athlete table, like name or salary, I'm setting it to the name of the other object that relates to the athlete one. So that's how you can link a sports team to an athlete, is you actually say set and then the name of that other object. And then I can just take the instance of, in this case, Bad News Bears, team 1, and pass it in as a property there. And then when I save this Babe Ruth record, I'm going to go here and run this demo. And first I'll go back here to my database. You can see there is neither of those tables are created. There's just a musician table, no athlete or sports team. Go back over here, run the table, and now you can see that player name is Babe Ruth, and his or her team is Bad News Bears. That's being outputted by this code right here. I have my athlete object. I can just say get athlete name. That's just one of the properties in that particular component. And then here is where I can link from my athlete. I can say go get this athlete's sports team object. And then inside there, go get the properties inside sports team. So team name or league or anything specific to a team can be linked back, and you can sort of daisy chain one object to another using that kind of syntax. So now not only have we done all 4 CRUD statements and created a table, but we've also done a join between 2 tables without having to write any SQL anywhere in your app whatsoever. You just put the properties in your CFCs, and Mura ORM will figure out how those properties link together. It'll figure out what the joins need to be and write all of that SQL for you. So obviously this could be, I could write, in this case I pulled back 1 instance. You could of course write queries that say go get me all of the employees and the associated departments that they work for, or all of the teachers and all of the students in their classes, or whatever the relationship is between your objects, and tie those together in your code. I'll close down a couple of these so I don't get confused. Go back here. So there's a bunch of our ORM code demos, just to show you some basic things you can do with Mura ORM. Most people would use it for things along those lines. Create tables automatically without having to actually write the SQL. Mura ORM is smart enough to know that the syntax for creating a table is a little bit different in MySQL than it is for Oracle, than it is for Microsoft SQL and what have you. So it will just take care of those differences for you behind the scenes. It works pretty well. So the catch, it's a little bit of a different way of thinking. If you are one of the 2 people that raised their hands and says you love writing SQL queries, we obviously wrote no SQL queries. So you kind of shift back into object-oriented land. Debugging things is a little bit different. In the case of Mura ORM select statements, it's pretty easy to see the SQL that's being generated. You can actually call .getQuery, and I'll show you a sample of that in a moment, and look at the raw SQL right there in your page to see what's being generated, double check that the joins are being done correctly, double check that the where clause is set how you want it, or whatever the things are you want to do. For other ORM libraries like CFORM and Hibernate and some of the other ones that you may have to dip into, it can be a little bit more challenging to get to the raw SQL and have it outputted to the screen easily. The select statements in Mura ORM are pretty easy. I have not tried to output the insert and update statements as they happen. I'd have to look at that to see how hard it is. I believe right now when you do a select, it does select star from table name to return the records. So if you have a table with like 50 columns in it, and you're returning, you're getting back an iterator over all the records, the SQL that gets generated is select star from, so it returns all 50 columns. If you're really terribly worried about performance, technically I guess that could maybe be a thing, but honestly, there's probably a zillion other things that cause performance in an app before that's actually the piece that makes your app magically 10 times faster. Let's go back here and take a look at the tables that got generated for my sports team and athlete. And I'll show you that it did create, there's my athlete table with all those columns we talked about. And there's my athlete ID, primary key. Here's my sports team ID that points to the sports team ID, not in musician, in sports team. And sports team is a primary key here, but it doesn't get actually marked as a foreign key in the child table. Maybe that's a feature coming later, I don't know. That is consistent though with how it does other stuff in the Mura database tables. If you notice, there's not foreign keys connecting some of the different baked in architecture right now. So it might be different than if you hand made it and maybe you did click on the column and built a relationship between them. But again, if you're just letting the objects do the linking of data back and forth, it's not really as big of a concern to not have a foreign key. It just kind of works and you can go on from there however you need to. All right, so that's the basic ORM stuff you can do. There's no limit to how many objects you make. There's no limit to how many different things you want to join together. If you have a real world relationship where you need to link 7 or 8 tables together in a join statement, you can do that exact same thing here in ORM land by just having 7 or 8 different properties that point to foreign keys in other tables, and it will link them all together, build your join statements for you. All right, so the Feed API, sort of a related thing that they added on to Mura 7 to make doing other SQL query things a little bit easier. Let's take a look at some of the Mura 6 syntaxes for getting feeds to work in your app. So here's a slightly older Mura 6 version of how I might want to return particular records out of a bean in my app. I can say get bean musician. I can say go get me a feed. So the concept of feeds themselves is not new to Mura 7, but this is how you would grab a particular record out of the database before. And that sample is really hard to read because of the blown up font I'm using, but I'll walk you through it here. We're just saying go get me a musician, where the name property is contains the word David. So basically in a SQL would be like select where name parenthesis or percent David percent. And then return that as a real SQL query. Dump that out to the screen. So I'll run that demo for you. And we get the output there. You can see it is in fact generating a real SQL query. There's the actual select statement that got generated. Nothing terribly exciting there. That works about how we expected it to work. Here's a slightly more involved version. I've got another table called Rock Band. Here's my Rock Band CFC. It looks exactly the same as the other ones. Extend bean ORM, set my meta properties, make a table called Rock Band, and there's some properties that are going to get turned into columns in the application. So here in our code, get an instance of Mura, load that bean up into memory, create the table if it's not been created yet, and I've got several records here. I'm just going to run this the first time, and I'm going to create a handful of bands for us. We've got some bands with their name and the year that they were formed, or as close as I guessed they were formed just off the top of my head when I created this demo. So go back here to feed 2, run this demo for you. And I've got 4 bands created in the app. Alkaline Trio, made a few of them. All right, now I'm going to go back here and comment these out so that they don't accidentally run a second time. Live coding right here in front of you folks. So now I've got what would be more likely to show up in a report in my app. Go get a Rock Band bean, get a feed for that, and let's see if I can make this a little bit easier to read. Sorry, that's getting a little bit tiny. I'll blow it back up in just a second. What this says is go get me any band. Here, I'll scroll up and show you the band names again. The Cure, the Alkaline Trio, the Spiders from Mars, the Clash, Depeche Mode, and Erasure. So some bands begin with the something, and some bands did not. I want to return a report that gets me all the bands that begin with THE space, so the Clash, whatever the other ones were, the Spiders from Mars, and so on. Again, using Mura 6 syntax, it's add param, and then these 4 or 5 properties you drop in here. I call .getIterator on the end of that. I get my Rock Band iterator back, and then I loop over it here in the application. What if I want to do something a little bit more complicated? Let me see if I can get that code to show up on the screen any better. Let's go this way real quick. I'm just going to indent this way how I would not indent it in a real app, so that we can blow it up a little bit easier on the screen for you. All right, there we go. All right, so we're going to add parameter and find everything, find every band that begins with the whatever, and we're going to tack another parameter on here. Find me all those bands that were formed on or after 1976, so not everything in the entire list. Stick those in an iterator and loop over them and draw the outputs on the screen, and that's what you can see right here. So that worked. I've got my 3 bands outputted there. It did all the filtering for both the name and for the year property. But that was pretty verbose syntax. Go back here to this demo real quick. Each time you want to put a new filter on your feed or a new parameter in your where clause, if this were raw SQL, you you have to put another .add param and put these 4 different properties in here on it. Get me a field, set the criteria to whatever, .condition in relationship to that. Do the same thing for the next ones here. It works. It's very much a syntax specific to Mura 6 feeds. It doesn't read, it reads like code. It's a little bit on the terse side. If you're one of these developers that doesn't like writing code out manually by hand, you don't like using macros and things in your text editor, it can get a little cumbersome to do that. The Mura 7 Feed API now looks like this. So this would do basically the exact same thing as what we did before. The first part of it is the same. Get a bean and get a feed, and that's what the code looked like previously. Get a bean and get the feed. Instead of these .add param calls that we have on the end here, we now have this. We say .where, just like you'd have where in a SQL statement. And then you come up with the property names. And I'm going to, this large font is going to be the death of me. I'll format this real quick for you so you can see it a little better. You say where the property of name is equal to, in this case, Les Claypool from Primus. And then you can say .get iterator or .get query on the end of that. It'll return back whatever you had. You can loop over the results and look at them on the screen. I'll do that .1.cfm. And there's my particular record on the screen. So we get the same kind of output, but this syntax is much less typing, and it reads a little bit more like English than the .add param syntax does. Let's go back here, and you can actually kind of read it like a sentence. Get me all the musicians where the property name is equal to Les Claypool, and then put that in an iterator. There's not a lot of terse keywords being passed around. It reads a little bit more like you would say it out loud to another developer or to your DBA if he was writing the report for you, and so on. And you can combine multiple properties the same way you did in the original syntax with putting more than one add param on the end of your feed. You can do the same thing here with SQL code. Get me everything where the band name is THE something, and where the property you're formed is greater than or equal to 1976. Stick all that in an iterator. It returns me back those records. And then when I run that report, I can get that content on the screen as well. So same kind of end result, but a much, much cleaner, easier to use syntax. If you're used to jQuery, where you kind of daisy chain methods together in jQuery plugins and stuff like that, this looks a little bit more like that, and it feels a little bit more like other OO technologies. Java does a lot of daisy chaining methods, and C++ is the same way. So if you have to deal with other developers and technologies, this is just real similar to the way things work in other places. So you notice these are all the new Mura 7 properties, or methods rather. .where property band name is set to whatever contains the value THE, nprop, and so on. There are a couple of dozen different options you can use here. So you can write a custom feed that matches whatever your custom database query would have been. I'm not going to go through all of those for you, but baked inside Mura, there's a folder called requirements, Mura bean, and beanfeed.cfc is the particular function, or file that's got all of the original Mura feed stuff in here. So at the top of the file, you'll see references to where to go. Add param is in here. Set params, which here's your add param. Here's the kind of Mura 6 way of doing it. It's still there. But down here towards the bottom of that same file, you can go take a look at, there's the where method, and there's the prop, and the end prop, and all of the new Mura 7 Feed API things that we're using. If you want to do not where this is equal to true, and another thing, if you want to do or, A or B, like you do an or clause in a where statement, there's an or property method for that. If you want to see if things are equal to particular values, not equal, greater than, less than, and so on, they're all down here. So you can go and tear through that file, and don't change it, but you can go through there and see what some of the different options are for playing with your Mura 7 Feed API. All right, so that's some neat little hello world syntax stuff. Here's a couple of reports that are close to sort of real world things I had to do on an app we worked on recently. So I was working with the Blue River guys launching a site a couple of months ago. Tons and tons of content from different sources. You might have similar setups like that if you have maybe an online magazine with 20 different authors. Some of them format things a certain way, some forget to give you associated images, some don't. You need maybe a master report that your webmaster can look through and say, okay, which content is formatted the way it's supposed to be, which authors gave me an official release date, which ones forgot, and so on. You can actually use the Feed API syntax to generate those sorts of things. If you want to know how many pages you have on your site, just to give a simple example of how I might do one of those, number of pages, get an instance of Mura, and instead of using musician and sports team and new custom database objects, you can also just go get an instance of a content feed, which points to the content baked into your Mura site, and you can use that same syntax to go say, get me a list of all of the, how many pages do I have currently live on the site right now? If you could do this with SQL, but you'd have to remember to turn off, in your where statement, you do where is active equals 0, where is active equals 1 to get only active pages. If you've got change sets that have or haven't gone live yet, you've got another big chunk of where clause statements to do with dealing with where it might be active content, but it's not yet live on the site because of a change set date and so on. You don't have to do any of that anymore if you wanted to get a report. You just run your feed, get me all the items. I've got max items set to 0, just so that it doesn't do any pagination behind the scenes. I'll touch bases on that in a little bit. Return a number of records, and you can see in this case, I've got, how many pages do I have in my site? Run it, and I've got 69 pages total in the site currently live. And here's my site with some demo stuff in it that we'll take a look at in a little bit. Go back here, and one of the things we had to deal with on the site was finding content that was missing an associated image. That's a real common problem if each article on your site needs to have an image with it so that the content cards are all formatted properly on your output pages or on your landing pages and so on. We have different things like that we've had to do. You can go and make a content bean, get everything where the file ID property is null. You've actually got a way to do null baked into Feed ORM, into the Feed API. So you can check if something is null. That will return all of my, in this case, I've got lots of David Bowie songs here and some other stuff, none of which has an associated image with it. If I want to sort that output, you've got sort options that work just like the order by does in SQL. I just turn on my .sort, sort it by title, refresh that, and it'll sort them all in A to Z order. You can, of course, do Z to A order just like you would in SQL. So some of the stuff you know about from SQL all works the same way. You don't have to relearn everything. I have not paid for this copy of Sublime yet. So again, I know SQL, but I get another real easy way to generate a report. Two more of these I want to show you guys. Go back here. Pages by a particular author. Go get me all of the content, and we're going to sort it by the credits field in Mura. So right now in my app, here's my Mura content, and I've got a bunch of songs over here. I think Never Get Old has credits for, it's written by, it says associated staff. So anything that I had blank before, I've got it set to associated staff as just a generic name for whoever wrote it. But some items, we actually have a specific author already added in there. You can see this one is set to David Bowie wrote the song Slip Away. Let's add a new page to this app. So put a new song in here, add content, make a new page, and let's put a new song in. We'll go with Master of Puppets. So who wrote Master of Puppets? Who's asleep? Everybody? David. Yeah, that'll work. Any variation of Metallica, I'll go with. All right, so publish that. There's my new item, and you can see that it doesn't have, there's no publisher in it yet. Credits is empty. Go back here in Pages by Author, and I'm going to rerun that report. Pages by Author, you can see Master of Puppets is right there with nobody listed as an author for it. One particular article, not a terribly big deal. I'd have my webmaster go in and type the author's name in, and we'd be done. If you're working on a big aggregated site with lots of content coming in from different places, you might have hundreds of different articles that need at least something shown up there. If not the person's real name, some sort of generic Associated Press added to that credits output or whatever you want to do. We can now go into Mura, and here's the report I used to get all of the content and sort it by who wrote it, either associated staff or down at the bottom you can see I have a couple that are set to Queen and what have you. Let's go over here and look at a new variation of that first report. So here I'm going to run one where I get back any article in the site, any piece of content from Mura, where the credits are blank. And I'm using set max items. Just basically, by default, the feed will return, I think it's 20 records at a time, just so it doesn't give you 8 gazillion things. If you want all of the records at one time, you can set the max items property to 0, and it'll give you everything from there. So I'm going to output any pages that don't have an author first, so I can just see a report on the screen of which records we're going to fix. And then here's what I can use to fix that. Take that content iterator, which is what I used up here. That's just the variable that I stuck my feed into. I looped over the feed once and outputted the results to the screen. So I'm just going to restart that feed so that the counter inside it begins back at number 1 and it goes again. That's just a thing you have to do if you're looping over the same iterator more than once on a page. Loop over it here. I'm going to grab any records that are in there, set the credits for that to associated staff, and then save it to the back into the database. And then we'll output the same loop again here, just to double check that there are in fact no records that need anything like that need any further changes. Go back over here, run my report. You can see it started out with Master of Puppets had no author associated with it. After processing, there's nothing on the app. I'm going to go back here to my Mura admin, reload the content, just so that any caching doesn't screw with me. Go into Master of Puppets. And now into publishing, it says associated staff. So we magically added a record there without having to type it in manually 100 times for different dangling articles in the site. You can do it all from writing, including my pretty liberal white spacing, less than 50 lines of code. And really, it's more like maybe 12 lines of code if you, well, even less than that. If we got rid of the white spacing, it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines of code to go through, find every article on our site that's missing an author, and at least give it a default value of Associated Press or whatever the thing is you're doing in your app, or in your site rather, excuse me. So Feed API highlights, it's a much easier syntax than the .add param stuff was before. Less verbose. It reads a little bit more like plain English. You can look at it left to right and just say, get me all the content where the first name is this and the last name is that. Return it back to the app. It's very similar to other OO languages if you have to deal with Java developers or .NET developers or whatever, or just plain Cold Fusion apps that talk to your Mura app. Other ORM libraries look very similar to this kind of thing, and other OO stuff in general works a lot like that. It also works a lot like jQuery, where you daisy chain stuff together in jQuery in a similar fashion. Some other Feed API tips that I found along the way building some of these reports. As we saw in some of the samples, you can add .getQuery on the end of that feed to get back an actual SQL Cold Fusion CF query thing to loop over just like a regular CF query. If you want all the records in your feed to come back instead of just chunks of, I think it's 20 at a time, put .max items on your feed and set it to 0, and that gives it everything back. Otherwise, by default, it sort of sets up for pagination just because of typically you do these kind of things inside a Mura app where you're maybe paging over content in a paginated sort of setup. There's also get iterator for rather than returning CF queries, you can return ORM beans. The difference in that would be rather than if you got back a SQL query, you got back the query name, you say .title or .body to get the title and body from that page to show up on your app. In the case of Mura ORM, when you get back an iterator, it comes back in a fully formed object. So you would call the methods get title and get summary instead of .title and .summary. And what that lets you do is, much like we saw in our earlier sports team demo right here, that lets you sort of daisy chain objects one off of each other, which you cannot do using the SQL syntax or the CF query syntax. You do that with getting actual beans back that know how to load each other in an organized fashion. It also lets you, if you are returning a content bean, your content page that you have also has categories associated with it and extended attributes and other things that are stored in not the T-content table in Mura, but in related tables. Well, the Mura feed, when you grab a content bean, not that one, like this, when I get back real content beans in an iterator, it's smart enough to know automatically make those extended attributes and some of the other common Mura properties available to you as well in there. So if I did this as real content, and I had extended attributes on that page, I could actually get them without having to write any extra code. I would just say get and then the name of the extended attribute. So maybe the song has like a publishing company extended attribute. I could say .get publishing company, and it would just return that extended attribute for me with no extra work involved. And again, if you want to do pagination with it, that's baked in. You can just say set next n, or set the max items to control how many records come back. If I have 10,000 articles in a site, I only want to see 7. You can say set max items to 7. It'll return them in small chunks for you. It also ties into the Mura Experience platform, if anyone's been interested in looking at that. We looked at the sort option earlier for sorting by title and by body, and you can sort them ascending and descending. If you've got the MXP license on your site as well and you want to sort by, not alphabetically, but sort content based on whoever's looking at the content now, what's the most likely thing that matches their MXP profile that should show up next? You can sort by MXP relevance, and it will dip into the MXP plugin, run through all of that machinery, and hand it back for you without you needing to change any code actually in your plugins or anything. You just coordinate with the Mura folks, install the MXP plugin, and you can sort by MXP relevance. It'll all come back that way. As you saw this morning, there's client-side options for doing a lot of similar things through the JSON API and through the JavaScript side of things. Grant talked about that this morning. If you weren't in his talk, I think they're recording everything, and so hopefully you can just watch the video of that shortly. So catches with the Feed API. Just remember to set max items to 0 if you're returning lots of stuff. I wrote a couple of reports and was confused briefly as to why I was not getting back all my records, and then I talked to Matt and realized, oh, I need to do that max items 0 thing. It builds upon, the Feed API builds upon Mura ORM, so it's the same behavior and kind of performance, for lack of a better term, that the Mura ORM stuff has. So yeah, technically it might, anytime you use an ORM, whether it's ColdFusion.net, whatever, it might not be writing the internal SQL statements in the exact same way that you would write it by hand. But A, who cares? You no longer have to write SQL statements. You no longer have to put the commas everywhere and put the curly braces everywhere and deal with all of the formatting junk with that. It just does it for you, which makes it quicker for you to develop, quicker to move your app from MySQL to Oracle to whatever. If you really do have a performance issue, disclaimer, I do not think Mura ORM is extra slow or anything. Some developers like to worry about performance every step of the way. If you do truly have a performance issue with your app, run your code through a profiler to make sure you do in fact have a real problem somewhere, and then fix wherever that profiler says is what you should do. Yes, sir?
So a cool tip is that you can write your own query. If you really have like a special use case, or you just want to, want to write your own query, you love query SQL, and then simply from an instance of a bean class, you can say get iterator, and you get the query that you just did with your custom SQL, and then set it into the iterator, and then iterate like you would normally do. So you can have your view tier, you can always combine an iterator and the same iterator, the contract that the iterator provides to deal with actual objects, but you can, in your controller, when controlling the data, you don't want to use the default query, or you have a very more complicated use case. You can't just do your own query, take that record set, and instead when you get query that you refer to, just do set query.
That's a good point, yes. So you can, yeah, if you don't want to, for the people that maybe couldn't hear it, if you want to write your own custom query, but you still want to use the ORM magic with it, there is a baked-in method called setQuery, where you can make a content iterator and write your custom query, call setQuery, and stick your custom query inside there, and then the rest of your app will just get an iterator, just like it would get an iterator if you used all the baked-in Feed API stuff. I have a code sample of that, not in this particular VM, but on my laptop. So if you want to see that in action, just grab me at one of the breaks or something, and I can show you a little bit of that line of code. I'm going to put that in my slide deck later too. Yeah, and if you're still stuck on performance things, there's caching and caching options in Mura and in ColdFusion or Lucy, whatever you're using. And as Matt mentioned, you can mix and match the Mura ORM stuff, and you can write your own custom SQL queries as well and flip between the two however you'd like to do that. And with that, I have about 5 minutes left if there are questions from anybody. Stunned silence? Take it. Yes, sir.
When you upgrade a version 7, I'm assuming it's backwards compatible, like the old way of doing feeds and stuff doesn't break, or?
When you upgrade to version 7, is it backward compatible with the old way of doing feeds? Yes, it should be backward compatible. All the .add param stuff that we did before is still in the same, it's still in this file right here. Close, close, close. Beanfeed.cfc. At the top of the file is all the .add param stuff you're used to, and at the bottom of the file is all the new Mura 7 stuff. So you can mix and match however you want, and it'll still work. Anything else? No? All right. Thanks, everyone, for coming. Enjoy the rest of the conference.